So I'd like to introduce you to Tom. Okay, on the floor.
Hello, everybody. Yes, I'm Tom, and I have driven from the coast. It's good to kind of see a bit of land and not smell different smells. So yeah, I'm going to talk a bit today about my life as my tax return says as artist and curator, and kind of talk about how one affects the other and makes one possible, how each one of them makes the other one possible or impossible or difficult, and kind of all those aspects of maybe what I'm trying to touch on, a number of aspects about what I do and how they all exist together. So I can start talking about what I do as an artist and my artistic kind of practice, which things could go wrong here. I'm using a mouse left-handed, it could get very messy. So kind of start off with image of my sort of my most recent activity, which is a work that I've done in. Actually, maybe I should kind of do a bit of setup about what my work is. So generally, my work is about space, like broad notions of space, and I suppose kind of a number of things that exist within that idea. So kind of space as a physical thing, space as a concept, as an idea, and then also a number of interrelated ideas, kind of like distance and time, and generally trying to make. I feel that in some way I'm trying to make sense of this stuff that exists and the space in which it exists in as well. A lot of my work looks at or increasingly uses kind of facilitate through digital means. That kind of digital space is something that's becoming very interesting, and also is kind of becoming very necessary, given that I don't have a studio anymore. I have very little time to make work in that traditional art making sense. So my studio is a laptop and spare time, and so digital space offers a great resource, as well as a kind of tool for production as well. So this is my most kind of recent part of my most recent kind of activity. It's a work that I've done that I did. It's just finished at Eastside Projects in Birmingham, and it was kind of working with an artist called Matthew Parkin, who his work is based around identity, shaping identity through physical objects, attitude, kind of how the internet as well kind of changes identity and manipulates identity, and is quite a democratic tool in that it enables everybody everywhere to manipulate themselves and outwardly project a ideal version of themselves. And so that's kind of underpins his work, and I think it's kind of we have a common ground there in that interest in digital space and also the distance inherent in digital space. So we started to talk about a work that we could make that would be cited as part of a project called Flat File, which is a plan chest which is permanently cited in the gallery, which they invite artists to respond to that plan chest. And so we had a conversation and thought maybe a little bit that it was kind of like. A plan chest is in some way, plan chest is a very arts thing, but it's that very kind of functional idea of a place to store things was interesting, and whether that's then plan chest relates to maybe a drawer at home where you keep your wares, and clothing becoming an important thing in outwardly projecting a message about yourself. And kind of things like that. So it started with I was approached to make the work, and for a while I had been particularly interested in, you can kind of see it here a little bit, there's an image of this guy in kind of sunglasses here. Is a picture of two astronauts during a training, like geology training in a New Mexico desert. And I've been wanting to use that image for a while, but never had the vehicle to kind of make it, to use it in any way. It's kind of an incredible image of two shirtless men with impossibly good looks and impossibly good tans that I kind of couldn't shake as an image. It's a very interesting image. So I kind of started to think about using that image and I think they're both wearing Levi's. And despite being taken by a NASA photographer, it looks entirely like a Levi's advert, which then later on, these images that are overlaid over it are from 2009 by a photographer called Ryan McGinley, who did an ad campaign for Levi's, and it's shirtless men with impossibly good looks and impossibly good tans in the American wilderness. And so this idea of space in a very physical way, as a concept, they're astronauts, was interesting, but then also the idea of space that surrounded that image and all those kind of collisions that could happen between various facets of culture and was interesting as well. So we kind of started to work up this kind of formulation that ultimately included some kind of beach towels. We collected various representations of denim, or what denim might be. So we kind of treated this plan chest like a host for. I mean, it looks like it could be a jeans advert or a display from a kind of shop, but also as a set of objects, as an approximation of what being a man in denim might be, and also what being a woman in denim might be as well. There's images this one here you can't see in these images, unfortunately. You can see it further down. So here, so it kind of takes this. There's a picture of Marlon Brando in the wild one, who is looking very kind of strong and very masculine, lying down on his motorbike, and then this image overlaid is a Richard Prince photograph of a biker girlfriend in a kind of entirely more submissive pose, and that seems to be the general attitude, the general way that denim rolls across the genders. Men that wear denim are in control, and women that wear denim are, it seems, in advertising, which is kind of interesting. So we kind of made this work, and I hand dyed some Levi's, and I washed them with meteorites as well. Kind of stonewashed them, re-stonewashed them with meteorites. Again, it's kind of some sort of nod to that kind of space issue from the original photograph that started the kind of investigation. And so kind of working more kind of shots of that there. And then this kind of copper plate thing that sets Levi's apart is that they're copper riveted, and so that is an imprint of my backside wearing those jeans, sat on a piece of copper. They're kind of trying to get some impression again, another sort of sense of approximation as to maybe what denim might be and what it might mean in wider culture. And this is kind of part of this idea of the way, I mean, it starts with an astronaut image, and that idea of astronauts and as being some sort of this kind of heroic kind of thing, or this pinnacle of athleticism and daring and adventure, and this kind of adventurous kind of spirit is something that's becoming quite important within my work. And so in a way that this kind of body of work, this Levi's advert kind of thing, kind of starts to relate to these works. And so this is one of a number of ongoing works of this is a trainer brought out by Nike in maybe in 2012. It's a LeBron James Hyperflight signature, which sounds incredible as a shoe. I can't imagine trying to ask for it at a shop. Do you have it in? It might be kind of. I think you get some blank looks, but it exists in the world, and that you would apply. So this photograph is of distant galaxies, and that you would apply a similar sort of logic, that idea of space, as a place of achievement, as a place of prowess. You would apply that to a trainer from somebody who jumps. That idea of leaping is quite interesting within that object. You could try and make a singular object which tries to say, a lot of things. And so it's kind of one of a growing number of train adverts. I'm fully expecting some sort of lawsuit from Nike when they find out I'm just using their logo and their trainers all over the show.
But there's Nike's actually real trainers, I think.
They're real trainers, yeah. You can get them from Nike's website. I've never seen them in a shop. I can't imagine that they're particularly, they're kind of hideous.
There's quite a few of that style, including like the Galaxy phone posits. A lot of phone posits that come out since. They're really popular with sneaker circles, but not mainstream.
Yeah. I think it's
they're hideous, like you say.
Yeah. I can't imagine. I think, I've had some trainers in my time, and I've got some looks, and I've been heckled in my time. And that's a new level. You've got to be. I think you can only be a basketballer, earning millions of pounds in endorsements to own that shoe in any way. I certainly don't think I could ever do it. And so kind of trainers, this particular idea, basketball trainers are interested, generally. The basketball trainers are interested in art, and basketball in art, kind of Jet Koons and Ham Steinbecker, to favourite artists of mine that use trainers. So it's kind of also a nod to art as well as it is to advertising, giving to those ideas. And then, so this is another work involving some trainers. These are 1984 Nike Vandal reissues from 2006. I don't know that that's necessarily important, but maybe it is. But they're silver kind of satin. They're impossible to wear. I bought them thinking they were a good idea at the time. I wore them once, and they're impossible to wear. They're frightening to wear. You don't want to do anything. You just want to sit in them because they stain. Because they're satin. I thought making a shoe out of satin was ridiculous. And then part of that idea then kind of filters into the work. So these, in each of these shoes is a meteorite from a 16th century witnessed fall in China, which I bought from eBay. And again, that kind of idea, actually the trainers came from eBay as well, so still kind of looking at distance. Those trainers, if they were originals, they'd be just slightly older than I am, so there's a distance there. Somebody says these meteorites, I bought the meteorites off somebody in Middlesex, so there's distance there, who then bought them off somebody in China, so there's distance there. I could be getting lied to. That distance is a very interesting place for legitimacy. Which kind of, as an object, I'm kind of trying to manifest that idea of tripping up, or if that work is about leaping, that work is about not leaping. Nobody likes a stone in their shoe. Essentially, it's a humbling experience getting a stone in your shoe. But then does that alter it if that stone is a meteorite? Are you okay with that being humbled by something greater than yourself in that way, or I don't know. And then this work relates to this work. which is again is a digital print of Buzz Aldrin's boot print, just in place, kind of pasted, I suppose framed within a cardboard box, and that idea of again trying to take something that is very terrestrial and apply it to talk about bigger things, and see what that does. Whether you feel a sense of maybe trying to ask some questions of an audience about how they deal with space as a physical thing. That shoe box is generally the size of people's feet-ish, and you have a very approximate idea of what something. Taking a picture of a boot print. I mean, taking a picture of a boot print is a great thing to have done on the moon anyway, because everybody's got a footprint, unless you've got no thing. It's going on YouTube, right? So yeah, it's a very democratic thing, the boot print, and so then a cardboard box, or a shoe box rather, is also quite a democratic thing. Kind of tries to get a conversation going with a lot of people through an object, trying to crystallise an idea within one object, in the same way that those trainers that LeBron James once tried to do. Trying to all that idea of achievement and reaching for goals, you try and put it in a trainer, and so yeah, this is all kind of happening around the same time. This kind of hypothetical advert for Nike advertisement as well. And then I move on to, at the same time as I'm doing that, I'm constantly looking about continuing this avenue of investigation into what space is, how people deal with it. And so this is a I don't know, it's not so much a work as it is a manifestation of a work. The work is a sentence, in a way, that I've appropriated from. It's a landing site on the moon. It has a Latin name, but that Latin translation is an ocean of storms, which I think is a great way to kind of think about lots of things. You can kind of reconcile your differences with a lot of things by just thinking of it in that way. Things don't make sense. Maybe they're not supposed to, because there's a lot of conflict within ideas and people and objects and images. So I've used this work in a number of ways, either as for a show that I did, which is a 3-part show called Easy Does It, which that show was about the application of very simple things and how you spin out a very simple thing into something grander than it is, and really looked at that criticism that a lot of art gets, that my kid could have done that, your child couldn't have done that, is generally the issue there. Your child can't think about those ideas in that way unless you have a super gifted child. So it kind of was dealing with those things. So this work has been used. It was a cocktail. I made a cocktail for the opening event, which was called An Ocean of Storms. I retitled the show, much to the annoyance of the artist, of the curator, that my work for his show would be changing the title of the show. And so it continues to manifest itself. It may appear again as a show later in April at the Baltic. It may appear there as well in some form or another. And so this next work is kind of looks like maybe some sort of terrain map for a planet, but it's actually it started off life as an Yves Klein painting. So Yves Klein made all these kind of blue paintings that he thought of as planetary reliefs. And then actually if you turn one of his paintings grayscale, it suddenly starts to actually look like a planetary relief from a really from satellites like the Lunar Reconnaissance and Mars Reconnaissance orbiters, constantly recording images of the surface of the Moon and of Mars, and so it's kind of taking Klein's ideas about distance and a void and imagining, and then kind of crushing them with fact, but also making a new kind of fiction as well. This here is a work which kind of looks at that photograph that I was discussing earlier of the two astronauts, and then they're in the background there. So this work is American. Is about. I'm not an American man. I never will be an American man, physically or ideologically. Quite interested what American men are. They wear denim and they live in the wilderness, but they're heroic in some way, and they're better looking than I ever will be. Films tell me that. And so I tried to make an image that then was in some way a landscape, kind of a landscape, which actually physically has landscape in it, but also is landscape in a kind of broader sense. So the images here are, there's the astronaut image. There is also an image of Dan Flavin, the minimalist artist Dan Flavin, and Donald Judd meeting in the desert outside Marfa in Texas, where Donald Judd had his home and a huge kind of gallery space for his own work, but also that he invited then other artists that he respected to respond to. Dan Flavin being one of them. And then there's an image of a cowboy, which is taken from a Richard Prince photograph, which is in turn taken from a Marlboro advert from the 1980s. And so, kind of using all those different, being interested in the space in which those individual people, those photographs, those ideas exist, and try and flatten them into some sort of composite idea of what something might be and how you kind of experience it. So this work then is called California, and again looks at Yves Klein. Yves Klein's work with blue, and him patenting a particular kind of blue, and that blue being a surrogate for a bigger idea, this idea of a void. And blue kind of exists. Well, this particular blue anyway exists in a different way now. I suppose I resized his painting. I found the dimensions of his painting and remade it in digital format to be used at in various applications, with a particular colour of blue which is used for special effects production and kind of chroma key. And so very physically, that idea of painting a space out blue, filming something and replacing that background with anything of your choosing, kind of seems to be a very Klein idea. So that's a departure from this work, The Golden Coast, which I did at a gallery which represents me in Manchester called Untitled. They have a very small gallery underground in a Quaker meeting house, and I mean it's a very small space, small subterranean kind of place, and so I showed a film which I'd made. I say I'd made. I'd got the open source footage of a satellite landing on a planet, and then I recut it and re-edited it. And projected it on a gold screen. And so this work again is about distance. It's also about physically, mentally, conceptually. This kind of crushes these places together. Kind of California is they're called California the Golden Coast. California is the home of Hollywood. It's the home of the Caltech. School of Art, it's home of the NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory as well. So all these kind of places that seem very different, though they seem to be selling very different things, are actually selling the same thing in some way. Conceptually, they're selling the same thing. So I try to, you know, deal with that in a space underground in Manchester. It could be any you know, any further away from a reality. And so yeah, so these are works from that show. It kind of, so that you've got the film in the background, and then gradually this kind of layering effect through the installation. The film exists, and then there's, you know, this kind of manifestation of the film exists. This kind of foil, ready-made kind of sculpture, and then it actually kind of exists in kind of a more physical space through these kind of rock formations as well, which I've been collecting. I'm starting to get into rocks a bit more. Rocks are good things, I think. They're kind of overlooked, but they're, you know, they've been around longer than humans, and they've seen things, and they will see things that, you know, more things than we ever will, when we're all dead. Rocks, probably. I don't think rocks get the respect they deserve. They get knocked about, like gardens. So the start of this installation is this kind of work, which existed on its own for a while, which was a still from that film that I had taken off the internet, overlaid with this text. And this text is a text designed by the American artist Ed Ruscha, called Boy Scout Utility Modern, and he made that. He had that font designed for work himself. He's an artist based, I suppose probably one of the most celebrated Californian artists. Again, yeah, I mean California's quite important in that kind of and kind of skip, get through a lot of things. So work there that is just again is a work about. I mean, it's called The Sun. And it is a film of the sun, a particular cycle, a single turn of the sun, which kind of is. I've yet to use it in an exhibition setting, you know, which is part of something that's becoming very apparent in my practice. Is that I make these things and they exist in a space, in digital space. They exist on a hard drive, and then they maybe get activated at some other place, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, sometimes it needs changing or thinking about on site. The particularities of the place have a wildly, you know, differing effect on the work. This is a show I did in 2012 at Block Projects in Sheffield, where I tried to kind of crush a number of images and ideas that I've been thinking about in isolation together in one installation. You kind of see those works later on. And so this was called, this installation, sorry, it's called Notes on Westward Expansion, and kind of tried to reconcile these kind of differences or approach the similarities between movements in art from the 1960s and also movements in human endeavour and maybe in, you know, evolution and, you know, the capacity for human minds to do incredible things. So going to the moon in 1969 is met, you know, that's a very scientific, technological achievement, but artistically and culturally as well, it's you know, it's probably the greatest artwork that's ever been going to the moon. It's, you know, it beats anything, really. It's very difficult to make to be an artist when you kind of think about things, you know, like that. You know, it's everything about that thing is perfect, from the way it looks to, you know, to how it brought people together, to what it means for culture and for people, for society in a wider sense. Yeah, it's difficult to kind of to deal with. And so I kind of crushed all these kind of ideas together. Until this arm's come down, so trying to kind of make them. Crush all these spaces together into one single installation. As a really cool thought. And so they relate specifically to these these works. So this is a work of taking one of the paintings that Mark the last series of paintings that Mark Rothko made before he committed suicide in 1970. He painted a series of landscapes that just look like lunar landscapes, almost like in some way that's a final gesture for modernism. Beyond that, there's nothing left to do. Like his work was done in some way. It's kind of very poetic, very tragic, but kind of probably true. So that kind of installation was soundtracked by this work actually, which is so it's a recording of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, slowed down to the length of time Neil Armstrong walked on the moon, and that kind of soundtracked this this installation. And it kind of builds gradually. So this work is 2 hours, 36 minutes and 41 seconds long. And gradually over that time it kind of builds and ebbs and flows, and kind of deals with the physical space of the gallery, as well as Moonlight Sonata was written as kind of this very melancholic piece of music, in some way like trying to respond to that kind of issue of, I think, going to the moon and coming back from the moon and never treating it, never entertaining it again is, it's an achievement that's tinged with a certain sadness about there's a possibility for human beings that's unrealised in a sense, which is it's quite a sad thing. So kind of try and manifest that, again in a single gesture. Again, swells. And I'm always kind of making these other little bits and pieces, these kind of paintings that are, they started off life as the remnants of a mixing tray for another painting, which actually was awful, so I threw away. But the more interesting thing was, how you could, these things were infinitely more interesting as paintings beyond them being, and they kind of look like planets, and that kind of, I quite like the idea of when you see a planet, it's a composite image of various kind of camera filters and spectral lights and radio waves, and there's a large percentage of particularly distant planets, they're always prefaced with artist's impression, which is quite interesting. And then also painting the sublime, and planets are planets are a sublime thing, the universe is a sublime thing. This kind of painting in the background, this photograph in the background that I've used for my website, feels completely like it could just be a John Martin painting from the 1800s, but actually is of a distant nebula, such as that interrelationship between space being about aesthetics as it is about physical property. And then these kind of other works that I kind of make and keep. So this is a paraphrased from a bit of sentence as "Man landed on the moon," or is a response to that sentence. It's from a JFK speech about why people do things, which relates to Rice University in Texas. Every year they play Texas University at American football, and every year they lose. I don't think they've ever won, but they play every year, and they try every year, and they lose every year. But they do it. I think art artists can take lessons from that about kind of thinking about why you do it, and it's okay to fail, and those sorts of things. So I kind of make these little bits as well, kind of they maybe look like kind of some sort of primitive sculpture, also like a halfway house between a sculpture and a kind of old scientific instrument or an architectural model. They never give themselves away entirely as to what they are. They exist singularly. They exist as groups, and they relate again to photographs taken on the moon, and also a particular photograph, which you can kind of see there. Not very well at all, but it's an Edward Steichen photograph of Brancusi's studio in Paris, where you almost don't know where to look because there's so many angles in it. There's so much stuff going on in that photograph. It's almost like he just happened to throw all these iconic sculptures in the corner, like, just wait until I'm just making this stuff and it just lives in a corner in my studio, but they're incredible pieces. So yeah, those are more extensions of that work. I'm just conscious of time. So again, kind of trying to deal with, space, the moon, artwork, objects. And actually, maybe I've not kind of explained my interest in the moon is a very definite interest in art, and art's fetishization of object and image, and the moon I think is the ultimate object. In a way, it hangs there, taunting. Is brighter than anything, in the sky, except the sun. But they don't live together. They're estranged. It's kind of like, I don't know, it's the best artwork as well. So that installation I was talking about before, they started off life as this, and an interest in the surface of the moon and the gallery space being places of places of excellence, I suppose, within specific fields of investigation. The gallery is that kind of pinnacle of that artwork, or that cultural, or a branch of cultural achievement. It exists there, and then the moon again. The moon is also a place, and aesthetically, just aesthetically, they look quite similar. You turn one negative, and it could be the other, which can be interesting. These works are photographs of the moon, digitally kind of corrupted. So then they have that conversation with those Mark Rothko paintings, and about images and about trying to replicate the sublime or deal with the sublime in some way. Actually, there's an image, one of those kind of reverse ones, which I've used in a previous show, in just outside Bradford, which kind of gives a terrestrial dimension to something extraterrestrial. It is quite an enveloping kind of experience. So that's my largely, my artistic practice is dealing with space and all those things that go along with space in some way. And then, the other half of my time, well, actually the other third of my time, because I also work at the Grundy Art Gallery in Blackpool as well as their gallery's assistant. But when I'm not doing that, and I'm not doing my own work, I'm doing this. I run a gallery called Super Collider, which takes up, a lot of time, and has had a massive effect on how I make work, how I consume work, how I deal with work, with artworks, and we show a range of things, and that kind of, I suppose, that way in which artists deal with a space that they're given, whether it be a physical gallery space, but also a place in a bigger sense, is something that's there in my practice as an artist, but is also very evident in what I do, in my kind of curatorial function. In that, Blackpool is a place of complete legitimacy and subjectivity. and it's very difficult to, it has a very particular visual language, it has a very particular acceptance of culture. Popular culture is its heartbeat, and so it's very difficult then to show artworks, or maybe it's very difficult to show artworks or things that exist within high culture in a space that's so committed to popular culture. And so that is essentially what the gallery does, what Supercollider does, is, you know, it takes those ideas of high art, high culture, and it really forces them into a space where it has to confront popular culture, and is largely, I suppose, is, you know, I've been doing it for 6 years, but it's largely an experiment as to whether that can actually happen in a legitimate way, whether artwork can exist without compromising itself to a degree that makes it, you know, unworkable as artwork, or whether, you know, or how popular culture can be affected by artworks. So I do that for a range of kind of approaches, whether that be through works, through showing artists or exhibitions that are very they're very sympathetic to Blackpool, or they're very contrasting, as in their approach. So there's a kind of a range of things that happen, which is actually a good one. So this show, Likeable, is an example of how a place, how they treat artwork as a the curator tried to select artworks that were in a very direct dialogue with what Blackpool had to offer, and whether that, you know, and actually as it turned out, that exhibition was one of our best attended exhibitions because it felt very much like it could just exist in the town anyway. It shows it. So we have works by Matilda Moore's in the centre, Eddie Peake on the wall there on the left, and was a very kind of visual show, and kind of felt, I mean, it felt very, very popular. It had a very populist kind of angle to it, and so that's kind of one way in which we approach, or which I approach that kind of, you know, approach shows curatorially through a very sympathetic approach, and then also kind of on the complete opposite kind of side of that, there is works like, where's a good one? So this one was a good one. Lee Machel, who's based in Manchester, who made this work. So I get a more kind of. So his whole show, he made a shelf and stacked Cook's matches around it, and then lit the match, and it burnt a line around the gallery. So it was very sparse. It was a very sparse show. It existed of that single work, just this kind of burn line at eye height throughout the gallery, like some sort of tide line. Was a very difficult show, to say the least. Actually, it was probably the all-time most difficult show until the last show we opened, which I unfortunately don't have photographs of yet. I'm yet to take those installation shots, but is a show by Rachel Bradley called In Blackpool, which is which I'll attempt to try and describe, but she completely whited out the whole space, and found Blackpool too difficult a place to make an artwork in. So her natural reaction then was to do something completely overblown, but she could never think anything exaggerated enough to trump Blackpool's visual identity. So the only place she could go was backwards and retreat. So the show consists of four works three of which are the same print, repeated on 3 different walls, of a offcut from a vanilla ice cream box, and it just says vanilla. And then there is a dehumidifier which is purifying the air in the gallery, purifying Blackpool air and redistributing it back into the gallery in a different kind of way. And so she treated the idea of a show as a default, and was quite interested in that idea of, if you go to an ice cream stall and you're kind of bamboozled by the amount of flavours on offer, and you panic, and so you just go for vanilla because it's starting again. And starting again seemed to be the only thing that she could do in the town. So it's kind of, people had a tough time on the opening night of that show, and people are having a tough time now with it as well, because it's so sparse and it's so other a language. It's a complete art language, and it's not in any way a populist, and it's not Blackpool's language at all. So yeah, that kind of. But then it kind of is interesting that we showed that work straight after showing this work, which was a one-night event, which we found, there was the Grundy Art Gallery has an exhibition that involves rave culture, and that sense of youth, it looks at youth subcultures, and largely is about kind of freedoms in some way, and what youth subcultures offer young people in the way of freedom. And I found this amazing film from 1990, which was shot 9 days before the Italia 90 World Cup, and 6 months after the government introduced a ban on young people congregating together, having a good time. And there was a campaign called the Freedom to Party campaign, so we showed this film in the gallery, and turned the gallery into this kind of nightclub kind of space, and it won't play now. It's typical. You get one shot at this film. Oh no, there we go. And so we turned the gallery very much into this kind of physical place. It's going to do. No. See all these kind of, in this film, you see all these kind of young people. The film is kind of nearly 2 hours long, which charts a night out. It's very, there's no post-production done to it. It's very legitimate film. It's almost anthropological in how it just records a group of people on one night. And so we showed that. We turned the gallery then. The gallery is a place of activity for one type of culture, and we turned it into a place of activity for a different type of culture. And kind of turned it into this kind of sort of nightclub. So I suppose those two things show on very. Let's see if we can get one last bit.
Who produced the film, Tom?
I have actually. If we could, if we could get to the end of it. Oh. And so it seems that it's just, there is somebody who's filmed his business card at the end of it. It's really cheap. But it's one of those kind of, available for weddings, bar mitzvahs, christenings, funerals. But it just appears to just be a guy. Actually, the best thing is, his business card says broadcast quality production. So what kind of broadcast he's doing. But yeah, it's an amazing film. ideas of what culture is. Blackpool's an interesting place. I often get, generally from people from inside it more than from outside it, that they lament the fact that there's no culture in Blackpool, but actually the place is teeming with culture. It's just a very popular type of culture now. We've only had a Pizza Express for 18 months. And it's not a Pizza Express like anyone I've ever seen. It's like a school canteen. And so there's two very different types of culture. Culture's been an owned term by a particular, culture is owned by ruled by class in some way. There's no culture in Blackpool, but there is. It's just not, it's not the culture of 5 a day and drinking enough water. But there's a lot of drinking goes on, but they're not drinking water. But it's very legitimate, and not last year, year before, 14 million people came to Blackpool, and 14 million people can't be wrong to coin Elvis. There's a legitimacy to that culture. So Supercollider operates in a way whereby it gives currency to that culture and sets up a dialogue with art and perceived high culture. So that's kind of what I do, really. If there's any questions, I'm kind of conscious I've run myself into the ground a little bit now. I should have shown that later. You can't really top it.
Do you take proposals from people? Are these kind of projects that you manifest yourself?
We do take proposals. So these, actually it's good to show, works that have come from proposals. So I initiate shows myself, but also, so this show was, I initiated, that's the wrong button. Not that one. Oh, I left out his notes. So I initiated this show, which kind of seemed very related to Blackpool, which had a number of video works in it, and this giant curtain, which maybe there's a longer shot. This curtain which bisected the space. So that was one I initiated. I invited that artist, knowing her work. I'd seen a great work where the work was entirely, she had a gallery, like the gallery attendant had to wear a white sheet and stand in the corner like a ghost, whilst the rest of the show went on. It was just a really simple work. And also she made a really amazing work called Claire Pecker, which is a plant, which she gave a backstory, and the backstory is that this woman, Claire Pecker, was following a disagreement with her husband, who was a member of the magic circle. She decided to leave him, so he punished her by using his magic powers, and he turned her into a plant. And so you're reading this story, and as you're reading, you become very conscious of, the type of plant it is, it's kind of very voluminous, and you become very aware that the plant is next to you, and kind of complicates your relationship with that inanimate object. There's a possibility in some remote land that plant might be Claire Pecker, listening in and unable to communicate. And that idea of turning something really kind of mundane or banal into something very fantastic is something that is part of Blackpool's heritage. There used to be a guy who used to walk up and down the promenade in the summer season called Firewood Jack, and his whole act was he would dance and he would wrap himself in firewood. That's it. There's nothing more to it. But in some way, he would get crowds. People would stop and people would watch him. People would give him money, maybe out of pity. But that idea of turning something very boring, very fantastic, very, very kind of, ordinary, if a little bit odd, into something fantastic and something, precious, is something that it's in the culture of the town, and so that that works very sympathetic. So I approached her to do that show, This show, actually there's no images up of that yet. That's a good example of one that came as a proposal.
Does anyone got any questions?
Yeah, feel free to stop me rambling.
You're obviously heavily influenced by America and American culture. Where does that come from?
I think it's been from the, I'm on the west coast of England. And it's a very specific area of America. I'm not interested in the east.
Yeah.
It's not for me. There's not enough talent, and there's not enough good hair, I think it's something about being.
Is it so very different to the west coast of Britain? Is that the attraction?
I think so. It's exotic. Yeah, it's completely exotic, and I think that being in the west coast of England, there's an overlap there that they're the west coast, and you think almost how different your life could be if you're on the west coast of somewhere else, but also the capacity for, I think seaside towns in general, but Blackpool's very interesting. I mean, maybe I'm biased because I'm from there, but I think the same applies, that people from seaside towns have a maybe strange relationship with, I find it very difficult to be landlocked, because landlocking, is, locked. My whole life, I've only ever been hemmed in on three sides. There's always been one side I could escape from. And it looks westward. And westward is interesting. The West. We are, in terms of politics and culture, Western culture is such a dominant thing. The West is a very political dimension. It's a very political thing as well as anything else. So I think it signals opportunity in some way, which is very intoxicating. And I think California is that kind of manifestation of it.
Do you think there are parallels between some people draw that inferring between Blackpool and Las Vegas, for example?
I think there is parallels, but I think Las Vegas is it's a very easy kind of comparison. There's something about Las Vegas which is kitsch and which is exaggerated, which is a dimension that Blackpool doesn't have. Blackpool's very legitimate. It's a very legitimate place. I mean, there's a definite similarity there, but they're also kind of striking differences.
So the Blackpool lights are quite kitsch, aren't they?
I don't. It's an ongoing. I end up in a lot of conversations about Blackpool's illuminations, and to the outsider, they're a very kitsch thing, but knowing them, have grown up with them, they're not. They're 100% legitimate. There's nothing. It's a great text to read. Sontag's Notes on Camp. If you read Notes on Camp and then walk around Blackpool, it's kind of brilliant. It's a great clash of high and low culture. But that whole kind of argument about camp, that relationship between camp and kitsch, and camp being ironic, and the issue of irony being involved in that dynamic. There's nothing ironic about Blackpool, whereas I think there is something ironic about Vegas. I don't know, I've never been to Vegas.
You discuss culture in terms of increases of population, which is a seasonal thing. Do you find that there is a bifurcation of culture within Blackpool?
Culture in Blackpool is, it's largely the same. I mean, it kind of exists. It's so the particular thing that it offers, that cultural pursuit that it offers, is so dominant. The diversification of culture in the town is, it struggles to diversify. So really, to offer something different is tough. You're fighting a big battle.
I'm not sure. You look at Stanley Park, the Blackpool Cricket Club, the football. There's always been a different sound. There's always been a middle class as well as the invasion every July, and you know, Scotland Week is a tradition. And if you haven't been to that on Scotland Week, it's something to behold. It's like the first day of Harrogate's sale.
Yes, the Glasgow River area is how they turn it. Right. I think, there is that kind of stuff, but those things. I mean, it's interesting. Those things, Stanley Park and the cricket club, and those things are. It depends where. There's a definite issue in terms of the definition of Blackpool, because Blackpool's a unitary authority, but actually is part of a bigger area. It's where I think postcodes play a massive issue, and so Blackpool proper is very different from Blackpool. Like there's inner Blackpool and there's outer Blackpool.
I wasn't thinking the file, I was thinking of Blackpool per se.
Can I just stop that conversation there, just because we were going on to talking about Blackpool, so I'm just thinking about students want to get back to their studios.
Yes.
If you want to, if anyone wants to ask questions after, is that all right with you, Tom?
Yeah.
Okay. Right, thank you. Thanks, Tom.
Yeah.